Hello everyone, Tutu Mora here with The Why, bringing you tools to feel well in your body, mind, and spirit. Today we're going to be focusing on a postural adaptation called a lumbar lordosis, or it can also be a hyper lordosis. So lumbar, the lower back, that last lower part of the spine, can adopt a kind of curve, especially if you're consciously or unconsciously kind of sticking that bum out and arching the low back. That posture can put a lot of strain on the low back when there's that kind of hyper arch in that space. So today we're going to be doing some stretches just to relieve some of that pressure, as well as to encourage that spine and posture to gently correct itself. Now, with anything, the postural corrections, they take time to integrate, especially if you think about how much time you're spending with your arched back posture versus the time you're spending correcting that posture. So work with this video consistently and you might notice that pressure start to relieve, as well as your posture gradually start to shift and change a little bit. So you won't need any props today. You're just going to need a mat to lay down on. And you can go ahead and lay down on the mat here. I'm just gonna bring the camera around. Okay, so we're gonna start here laying on the back, knees bent, and just take a moment to feel your spine resting down on the mat. Now, many of us, with different body types, the body can rest a little bit differently on the mat. So we want to just be aware of the structure, the bones, and how they're resting as well. So bringing awareness to the pelvis. Do you notice kind of where your sit bones are resting, where your hip bones are resting, and how that spine of the low back is arched or whether it's flat? And so just taking a moment to breathe and notice how your bones, how your spine is resting there on the mat. And now, while you have that awareness, we're going to take a couple gentle pelvic curls. And so just allowing that pelvis to gently tilt, as if you're sliding that tailbone between your legs. And then come back to what's called a neutral pelvis, where you're kind of resting right between your hip bones and your sit bones. And we're going to take that back and forth, and just noticing how your bones are resting, how your spine is resting, and how that arch in the low back is responding. So we'll just take a couple here, back and forth. Now, for those of us with a lumbar lordosis or hyperlordosis, resting on the mat can already feel like you've got this arch in the low back. And so to gently stretch that, we're going to take a little pelvic tilt here, just enough so that it feels like your spine is resting a little bit more heavily and flat on the mat. Now that can feel a different way depending on your body type. So just see if you can find that pelvic tilt and find that awareness of your spine sort of just gently relaxing that arch just a little bit more into the mat. We're going to bring the arms up, fingertips towards the ceiling, gently finding a plugged in feeling of the arm through the shoulder. And we're going to start to float those arms overhead. Now, you might notice pretty quickly that your chest wants to pop out a little bit, your shoulders might start to round forward, or you might be tempted to shift that pelvic tilt that we have going on. And so just finding the edges of this movement right up until your spine kind of wants to change. And then take a deep breath there. And bring yourself all the way back. So your arms may not make it to the bottom, back to the mat here. So just finding the edges, and we're going to take a couple here, keeping that pelvic tilt, keeping that feeling of your spine resting heavy on the mat. And right up until you want to feel that spine change, take a deep breath at that spot. Perhaps reach those arms away a little bit from the back of the armpit and find a little stretch. Lengthen through that spine and bring yourself back to the starting point. Let's take a couple more here. Holding onto that little pelvic tilt, finding that reach, and plugging those arms in as you take that back. And we'll take 2 more here. And last one. Resting those arms back down. And let's take a couple little curls of that pelvis and uncurls, just feeling that pelvic tilt, feeling that neutral pelvis, perhaps feeling the difference in how that spine is resting on the mat. From here, we're gonna come over onto all fours. I'm gonna tilt the screen up just a little bit. Okay. So onto all fours here. Wrists directly beneath the shoulders, knees directly beneath the hips. And we're gonna find that same sensation. So once we're in a flat back, I'm gonna tilt up just a smidge more. All right. So once you're in a flat back position here, you're gonna find that little pelvic curl again. Now you might be tempted to arch from here, but see if you can find that little pelvic tilt into the opposite of that arched back. So pelvic tilt, and then we're just gonna float that back into a child's pose, holding onto that feeling of that rounded, curved, tilted pelvis, the opposite feeling of that lordosis, arched back. And just sinking into this stretch, breathing into the low back. Now holding onto that feeling, that little pelvic tilt. Onto your forearms, we're just gonna lean this forward, holding onto that pelvic tilt, and taking that back. Nice deep breath, and we're gonna take that 3 more times. Widening through the sit bones to help you, support you through the glutes. And taking it back, maintaining that little pelvic tilt. Deep breath, and 2 more. And last one, widening through the sit bones so those glutes help you, yet you maintain your pelvic curl. And sinking back 1 more time and breathing. Perhaps reaching those arms forward, just breathing into that stretch. And then you can go ahead and sit on back up, standing up, and just feeling into your posture standing up here. And noticing, once again, as if the mat were behind you, how is your pelvis resting on what would be the mat behind you? So are you kind of resting on your sit bones with that arched back? Or do you have that neutral pelvis? And seeing if you can integrate that as you stand here, just breathing. And we're gonna gently tuck the chin, articulate down the spine to whatever degree feels comfortable as you maintain that posture that you'd like to strengthen. Now, if you make it all the way down to the ground, that's great. If you don't, that's okay. And just hanging out at the bottom if you make it all the way down there. Bending the knees as you articulate all the way back up. Once again, noticing how you're standing, finding that posture correction, and we'll take one more, gently tucking that chin, maintaining that little adjusted pelvis as you gently stretch that, articulating down and stacking all the way back up. All right, so go ahead and just notice how you're feeling here, how you're standing, and taking a few minutes to perhaps turn to your posture if you notice that you've adopted that arched back posture, just to gently stretch out that space, relieve some of the pressure, and gradually shift that posture into a more aligned space. So I hope you found this helpful, and I'll see you back here next time on the Wise YouTube channel. Take care.